encourage your soul, enlighten your mind, and empower your faith. This is the Light Network. If you want to be a serious Bible student, a successful servant, and a powerful preacher, this is the podcast for you. Hello and welcome to Preachers in Training. I'm Robert Hatfield. This is the podcast on which we discuss all things preaching and ministry. And today we've got somewhat of a unique topic, although it's one requested by you, our listeners, preaching for a bilingual congregation. And I said that earlier. I did not say it accurately, but y'all don't know that. I'm confessing to you. But our guest knows that. Barton Kizer is joining us once again. Welcome back.
Hey, it's great to be here. This is exciting.
Well, thank you for being here.
Platform too here at the lectureship.
That's right. So people may hear the dull roar of conversation going on around the Brewer Sports Center on the campus of Freed-Hardeman University. We're recording this in the midst of the annual Bible lectureship in early February. A warm February for lectureship. We had ice last week, though.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Wow,
it's all good. Barton, tell us what do you do? What are you up to these days?
That's a good question. When I wake up in the morning, I ask myself that same question.
What am I doing?
What am I doing? Because there's been a lot of turnover, a lot of back and forth or shifting plans. The last 3 years, like everybody says, has been pretty tumultuous.
Right.
But currently, I'm content and I'm excited where I am. I live around Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm continuing a ministry that I started with some teammates in church planting with Hispanic communities there. And so I'm in a role where I am preaching and teaching in both languages, outreach, all the things that church planting entails. So there's a lot of days where I speak in Spanish much more than I speak in English.
Wow.
So I currently have 1 foot in that world and 1 foot in this new world with an organization that's called Great Cities Missions. And I've been a part of this organization for 15 years in the role of being one, trained by them and cared for by them. And so I have a history with them and know them well. I considered working with them a few years ago before I went to Charlotte. And now I'm blessed to be able to be a part of the organization full time. So that's great. That's what we're doing.
You graduated from here back in the day.
Yes, back in the day.
Back in the
not
day.
Too long ago.
Yeah, I know. You're like, I've been working with these people for 15 years. I mean,
right.
Yeah. I think of myself as still new to all of this, but I think the reality is different. But anyway, and then from there, you went and received training. Tell us.
So
walk us through.
Yeah. So 2003, I graduated, and then I worked on my master's degree here, finished that up, and then there was a little bit of time where I was doing youth ministry in Birmingham, and we had a team, and mission teams, just by nature, are very fickle, very delicate.
Yeah.
In that the beginning stages, it could be a big group of friends, and then little by little, people call, offer jobs, life happens. Unfortunately, some bad things happen to people that take them out of the picture to where they can't travel and live in another country. So some of that all happened. And then one day while we were planning this, Matt Cook, who is with the missions department here, he called my office and he said, "Hey, if we're going to do this, let's do it." I said, "Okay." And so we sought out training. We talked with Mark Blackwelder here. He plugged us in with what was then Continent of Great Cities. It's now called Great Cities Missions.
Okay.
And so we got connected with them, began training with them. And you're right. We spent about 9 months 6 months in Dallas on location. We trained with them. All that entailed was strategy formation, team formation, growing in capacity to cross cultures, language acquisition. So a really great program. And then they went with us. We did survey trips. They actually went with us on the big move to Peru, helped settle us in. They were there with us for 2 weeks or so. And then after that, they would drop in periodically. And so we had an overseeing church that we would report to, that we worked with, but then Great Cities was a resource for us, and they helped us out. I look at it as I work with the organization now. We fill in gaps. We answer questions that that usually go unanswered in the world of missions.
Mm-hmm.
And so we recruit, we train, we help, we care, and we try to up that number of people who go, and then up the percentage of people who stay.
Yeah.
That's kind of the idea.
Well, and it's just impressive, and that's what I wanted our listeners to be impressed by. And I think we probably went into some of this last time you were on, but just I think a lot of us fail to appreciate how much mental effort and strategy goes into something like what you guys did when you went and started that work in Cusco, Peru, and you're bringing all of that experience now, having been a part of that and fulfilled the phase that y'all were a part of there out of the country, and now you're bringing that into more domestic mission work, but still working with Hispanic people, Spanish-speaking people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
that's the idea, and that's me being in two different roles now. Getting to do that, working with that, and then at the same time, this new work will take me internationally. And so you're right. The experiences and the skills and the teaching that I received, the investment that people put into me, I hope that I can be of value to other people, because it is crucial. And there are some big holes in the experience of being a missionary. And so we need people to come alongside of us and help us out. So I hope I can do that.
Well, and it builds a framework in it. I guess I'm veering a little bit off topic, but okay. I know a lot of
topic. I like talking about it.
I know a lot of missionaries who often, you get out there on the field and you may feel disconnected, not supported. Maybe you've got some monetary support, but you don't have just a lot of connection, fellowship, that kind of thing. And then the pandemic complicated all of that for everybody, not just because everybody was dealing with the same thing, but a lot of churches stateside started worrying about their income in terms of contributions, and can we support overseas, or do we need to double down on our work at home? And all of that was just terrible, excruciating stuff and hard decisions that
a lot of missionaries came home. It's hard for me to think of a few names of missionaries in Peru today, because most of them came home as a result of the pandemic. And I think that happened all over the world. Peru wasn't an exception with that either. So
wow.
Yeah.
So all right. So that speaks to some of that. There are many congregations, I think, maybe certainly not a majority, but there's a good number who may host Spanish-speaking individuals, or maybe it's not specifically Spanish-speaking. Those are the ones I hear of the most. But individuals who speak another language, maybe, the English-speaking congregation meets 9 and 10 a.m., and then the other language speaking folks come in at 2 p.m., and then, the English people are back at 6 p.m. or whatever. I've heard you talk before. That's great. And to have those facilities is a blessing, particularly if those facilities are right in the area where the individuals who speak those other languages are already there. The goal may be more than that, right? It's not just we share a building, but we share fellowship. We're a part of the same thing.
One church, two different languages.
Yes, right. So I guess as I'm transitioning into this bilingual aspect of this, it's more than just, these people come in when we're not here, right? I mean,
it's more than just
the
scheduling.
Ideal? Right.
It's more than just scheduling and pulling out a calendar and trying to work out between two different groups.
Because you live in the same area.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're
part
probably
of the same community in a sense, even though there's different cultures going on there. So the vision, the dream, even though it's a complex one, and even though we make a lot of assumptions that we shouldn't when we bring people from different cultures together, but the idea and the vision is that people from all nations come together and worship God together, regardless of the language. Regardless of how many hoops we have to jump through and accommodations we have to make, these groups can come together under one roof, under one eldership, one leadership, and be able to worship and serve God together. That's the dream.
Yeah.
The reality is different, and the gap between where we are and where we want to be is a big one. But I think you mentioned that this was a suggested topic.
Yeah.
I just want to speak about the our own country, and how much is changing and how much has been changing for decades now. The immigrants that are coming in and the different languages. And when we say Hispanic community, really they're Hispanic communities,
Okay.
different countries with different cultures and different values and experiences coming together. So all of that creates so much complexity in our country, and it has ramifications in different areas that I don't want to speak about, politics and, the workforce and all of that. But what is interesting to me, what we've been trying to work with in the past 3 years, and even with Great Cities Missions, is answering some of these big questions about that. What does a bilingual church look like?
Mm-hmm.
What does a multicultural church look like? People get excited about it today, but when they start digging into that question, they realize just how complex and how difficult and how accommodating everybody has to be to make something like that happen.
A lot of selflessness involved in this, right? So, yeah, okay. I don't want to go negative on the episode, but I mean, we can't expect. Well, you're here and you're coming into our church building, so you need to speak our language, or or whatever. There are ways to be more accommodating than that.
Yes, accommodation is the word. Some people talk about assimilation and as opposed to accommodation.
Okay.
And really, the Hispanic communities in our country are diverse, not just because of different countries, but also because of different generations. And so when you're talking about a bilingual congregation, you have to consider which generations are coming in. There's the grandparents and the parents and the children. So there could be 3 generations represented there. Of those 3, all 3 of them understand and experience the U.S. in a very different way.
Sure. Okay.
And so the grandparents may represent the immigrant generation. They came in years ago. They can't speak any English.
Yeah.
They just speak Spanish. And in fact, to worship in English for them is a horrible thing. Worshiping God should be done in Spanish.
Yeah.
That's maybe I'm generalizing here, but maybe that represents a lot of people from the previous or the older generation. And then there's the parent generation that's in both of those worlds between the grandparents and the children. And so they're kind of caught in that tension. And then there's the children who may not even be able to communicate with their grandparents in Spanish, may have been native born here in the U.S. And that represents a large percentage of the population in the U.S. And so it's challenging a bilingual congregation because of the languages, because of the preacher who's been there for years. He can't speak Spanish. And now there are Spanish speakers coming in. So that represents a challenge. But it's also challenging because this affects not only language, it affects understanding, perception, and culture, and how they view the Bible and how they understand the gospel, framed in their own experiences. So there's just I'm just creating problems in the podcast this morning. I don't want to solve anything.
Well,
I just want to throw out how complex it is.
Right. Yeah. Things to think about. And are we willing to answer that call? Right. I mean, because the reality is these people are already in these people. I don't mean that derogatorily, but these cultures, they're already a part of our community.
That's right.
And they're interacting in those ways. Now, maybe there is still that great divide, right? I mean, they tend to be in their communities where, they all speak that language together, at least all those families, like you just said, multi-generations, but they're right there together.
Yes.
They may even have certain parts of town, where they have grocery stores or maybe other stores where everything is primarily in that language or more suited to their culture. And then the rest of us are over here in our parts of the community. I think we have to ask, is that really what the Great Commission or the gospel wants us to do and to be? We take short-term mission trips, Latin America or whatever. We go down there, and maybe for some of us it's novel to preach with a translator for a week or whatever. But I've heard and I've thought myself, well, that would be difficult to do every week.
Yes. Yeah.
But there are preachers who do that every week. I'm thinking about over in Athens, Greece, and those folks who worship over there, they have multiple cultures represented, speaking multiple languages. And in fact, sometimes even maybe 3 different languages. So you may have English and others.
There's refugees all over the place that are being, dispersed in different areas.
Right.
Yeah.
So my point is there are congregations for whom this is the norm.
Yes. Yeah.
And maybe we need to open our minds a little bit to think, well, maybe that needs to be the norm.
At the heart of this, for me, is the capacity, the skill to cross cultures.
Okay.
That's the way I see it. You mentioned short-term missions a minute ago, and I'm a believer in that. I think it serves a good purpose. And the exciting thing about it is you get to cross cultures. Someone who travels to Peru or somewhere else in the world, they get to go into this touristy restaurant and eat guinea pig. Right. Or they get to go to Machu Picchu or whatever. These are experiences I've seen people come into where I was. But what's even richer is they get to go to the local church and sit and worship in a language they don't really understand, but they see how meaningful it is. So there's a really great experience with crossing cultures, and we're okay with that until it actually comes into our territory. And again, maybe we're being a little too heavy, a little too negative this morning. I apologize, but it is a part of the discussion that crossing cultures is okay as long as we get on a plane and do it. But if we have to cross cultures in the city we grew up in, maybe for some, that's a little uncomfortable. Right. Maybe we don't like that as much. But when we think about the country changing the way it is, not only that, but people that look like us and work in the same areas of the city we work in and live in the same areas, those people are changing too. Like, culturally speaking, our country has been changing for a long time. So it's not just people from Peru or Central America that we have to communicate differently with. I'm expanding the topic. It's also people that we once understood and knew, they've changed. So Anglos in our own community are more secular, right? If we have to put a label on it, or just think differently than we think. And so now the question is, how do I communicate with the Central American, but also in the same community? How am I going to communicate with the neighbors' kids that I grew up with, but are now completely different? Right. One of the blessings of being at the lectureships here is I get to wave to people I haven't seen in a long time. So, nice. But you understand the point there is that this is expanding the topic. This reaches out to not just people who look differently than us, but we're encountering more and more people who think differently.
Sure. So we may speak the same language, but we may be in some senses worlds apart in terms of worldview. Values.
And what that means is the effort that I put into understanding a Central American, I now have to put that same effort into understanding somebody that maybe I grew up with. Right. And understanding how to communicate the gospel to them.
So is it fair then to say that there's some common skills that I can learn one to the other? I mean, it's not a perfect crossover, right? But there's common skills.
Yeah, I think there's overlap between that. You know? And it's the world we live in, to where we have to develop that skill to be able to be perceptive, right, and to listen and to start where people are. That's the way I hear it.
Be all things to all men.
That's right.
Right. Right. Exactly. Okay, so wow, this just hit all of us between the eyes, because suddenly, I mean, I think there are some people who are listening to this and they're thinking, okay, I'm in, some rural town in whatever city or state. Bilingual congregations just aren't a thing, whatever. But crossing cultures is a thing.
It is
everywhere. Even deep south, or places steeped in tradition, and we would think even traditional morals and values. This is happening everywhere.
Yeah, it is. The United States is. It used to be called a melting pot. I've heard some people describe it as a mosaic now.
Okay,
and that cultures are still intact.
Yes,
that we're not mixing together as we once. And so, if that's the case, then yes, we're going to have to learn how to cross cultures, regardless of where we are. So, and that's a difficult thing to do.
Sure. All right, to be sure, just backing up a moment, because I don't want people to think that if they worship with the congregation where you do have, one culture who comes in at 9 and 10, and then the other one who comes in at 2, and the twain do not mix. That's not sinful, to do that. I think the point is perhaps it's not ideal. Right. I mean, is that too strong a way of saying that?
No, that's good to say. We're certainly not promoting that everybody needs to correct that immediately, because in some cases, maybe that needs to be done, because people do want to worship in their own heart language and hear the gospel preached in the framework of their own culture.
Right.
And so maybe that needs to happen in a lot of scenarios. But really, if we have, I guess we could back up and say this too, if we have a church that has elders, and then in the list of ministries, youth ministry, senior ministry, outreach ministry, and then on the website we have a tab called Hispanic ministry. That is just a branch of what all is happening. I think what I want to say is that may be a misunderstanding of what needs to happen.
Okay.
Because that Hispanic ministry is actually a congregation. It's not a ministry.
Right.
A branch along with everything else on the buffet that we're offering.
Yeah.
It is something that needs to grow into its own and become eventually autonomous.
Right.
Whether that means that it's mixing eldership or mixing themselves with the eldership. In other words, for example, people from that Hispanic group eventually mature and men become elders along with other Anglo elders.
Okay.
But there needs to be some decision making. There needs to be some accommodating that happens on both sides.
Right.
To where they're not just in a classroom forever or in another part of the building, but that they get to be a congregation that is mature and independent and autonomous.
Okay.
There's different ways that could look like in the future too.
Yeah. So your mileage may vary, based on maybe the size, the maturity level of those others, or even I don't know, resources that are available. Maybe even just the community itself, right? Yeah. So okay. Yeah. All right. So here's what I'm thinking, and you can correct me if you want to go a different course here. I got two parts to my next question, but anyway. If there is a congregation right now and they're hosting some other, maybe they're, like you said, an Anglo congregation, but they're hosting people of other cultures in the scenario that we just talked about, right? Those people come in for like a mid-afternoon Sunday worship service. They may meet on like Tuesday nights instead of Wednesday nights for about midweek or something like that, right? Yeah. What would be just some high-level bullet point next steps for those kind of congregations? And then my B part to that question is, okay, maybe there's a congregation and they're Anglo, but they're seeing, hey, our community, not in the church, but our community around us is made up of people of different cultures, and maybe primarily of one specific, though to your point about multi-generations, but nevertheless, one specific culture. We'd like to reach out to them because we feel like as the church in this area, we need to do that. Yeah. So I guess I'm asking, okay, part A, what are next steps for them? Part B, what are next steps for them? Yeah. Just high level. And maybe they need to contact you guys down in Texas. Yeah,
it could be. But eventually what you're saying is that the church should reflect the community.
Sure.
Whatever the makeup of the community, the church should reflect that.
Yeah.
So bringing more focus in and talking more specifically.
And by the way, should. I mean, we're getting that from gospel principles, right? So this isn't just, well, we're sitting here and ideally this would be good because blah, blah, blah. Like, this is Jesus telling us to do that. Exactly. All right. So thus the practical tips you're about to give us. Sorry. I just wanted to make sure everybody was on the same page about that here.
Yeah. No, and I could go into the Bible, Jesus's example. I always bring up the Samaritan woman in John 4, crossing cultures. I mean, to me, that is almost parallel to what we're seeing today.
Okay.
But we'll leave that, for another day.
These preachers know this stuff.
Yeah, they know. Okay. They can connect the dots.
We're making assumptions here.
Yes.
I just wanted to get that out there just so we're clear about all of this. Okay. Sorry.
So in the first case, you mentioned a church that wants to maybe take next steps.
Yeah.
That already has kind of something, there's so many different scenarios, but there's something in their building in the way of a group meeting, whether it's with the Anglo, or probably more likely in a classroom or in the fellowship room, a Hispanic group, for example. So that's all over the country. I think, in my opinion, and I'm learning this too, and I have little experience in North America with church planning and what needs to be done. But in my opinion, the leadership, the decision makers eventually need to sit down and think critically about what needs to happen.
Okay.
Is this a group that we can have strong fellowship ties with? And can we create community with this group despite the obstacles of language? I'll give you an example. Where I'm currently worshiping, the Archdale congregation in the Charlotte area, they've been doing this for years, and they have pretty close ties with the Hispanic brethren in that congregation, and it works pretty well. And so they have strong relationships. They depend on each other. Now, sometimes after worship, I'll look around and there's a lot of hand motions and gestures going on, and I don't know what's being said in that conversation, and I'm not sure both sides of it understand 100% either. But there's a lot of love and a lot of patience and a lot of accommodating that happens in that congregation. And I think
it's the only way it's going to work, right?
It's the only way it's going to work.
Okay.
And really, everybody needs to be on equal footing in the congregation. So that it could happen that way, but I think there needs to be a lot of accommodating. That's the key word for me.
Okay.
There just needs to be a series of questions that people need to answer. That eventually, to me, what's important is leadership. Eventually, has leadership reflecting the congregation. So if you have different cultures in your congregation, there needs to be leadership of different cultures, maybe different languages too.
Right.
I've seen this happen in South Florida with one church in particular. It's about 400, about 200 Hispanic, 200 Anglo. Their leadership, their eldership is half and half as well. They have a minister that's bilingual, and he's an elder as well. In a lot of meetings, he will translate for all the elders there at the table.
Yeah.
They go through all that complexity and all that effort just to be able to have a unified congregation where everybody has access and everybody has the ability to mature in the same way and understand the vision of the church. So there's that scenario that I think could work.
And that because, like you said, reflecting the community. So in our community, in our real lives, we're interacting together. Why would we not seek to do that in the church? And thus working through the complexities, whatever effort is required.
And it's a great testimony to the community too.
Yeah.
A visitor comes into church and says, wow, there's so much division and discrimination and horrible things that happen in our community. I come to this church and everybody's treated with respect.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great testimony for the church to be light in their own community. What happens though if I don't think it has to look like that. Okay. I think there can be other arrangements. I think there can be other ways that it can grow into something that is great for both groups. So I've seen in other places where the mother church, you could say the Anglo church, eventually secures a location for a Hispanic congregation, and they are able to meet in their own building. They're able to have their own leadership, and basically it's a church plant is what's happened. So
Spanish-speaking church plant.
A Spanish-speaking Hispanic church plant. Maybe in some cases, because of the different generations there, with the younger generation being English dominant, even though it's Hispanic culture, that younger generation, they may even have an outlet for English, worshiping in English or Bible classes in English.
Okay.
But it's still Hispanic culture.
Yeah.
And so maybe an Anglo church does that in their community and decides to have a church plant with Hispanic.
Yeah. What does that mean, Hispanic culture? Does that affect the kind of songs that are sung,
yes,
the look of the building and facilities? I mean, what?
That's a great question, and one that I'm still a learner. I'm still a student of. But I mean, the aesthetic, just the things that they get together and celebrate. Because every congregation has a culture, a personality.
Sure.
Sometimes we don't we reject that, but it's true.
Right,
We all
right.
everywhere I worship has a personality, and so
are they going to have a sweethearts banquet around mid-February?
Yeah,
or are they, stuff like
exactly.
that? Yeah.
So they have that. It makes them feel at home, which
Yeah.
is important for a congregation. But I would say, you mentioned the songs. That's definitely a part of it. But also the way the gospel's preached.
Yeah. Okay.
I believe, that I believe it is important, as we say, to preach the whole counsel of God.
Yes.
I think that's essential in the pulpit. But really, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that in most cases, people preach on certain things more so than others.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of times it's a cultural thing.
Right. Perceived needs to the culture to whom we preach.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, and not only that, but just who the preacher is, with illustrations, with the way he expresses the gospel, with certain passages, maybe he elevates over other passages. And so, depending on the community, there are struggles and hopes and dreams and just different values that communities have. And the gospel is so beautiful that it is malleable, is flexible to be able to go into those different areas. So that to me is one of the most important things. And I think with this topic needs to be considered.
Yeah.
When I preach to Anglos, I preach in a different way, not just because of Spanish, than I do when I preach to Hispanics.
Sure. Okay.
And I've heard other missionaries say the same thing. They preach in different ways with different topics and illustrations and different values within the gospel, of course.
Yeah.
But they preach in different ways to different communities. So
you see that in Acts, depending on the way the different preachers, whether they're preaching to a Jewish audience or a Gentile audience.
Yeah.
Right?
Again, Paul is the major example there.
Right.
The way he preached to the Athenians as opposed to the way he preached to Jews. He would, and Jesus is the same. He did the same thing too. So it's a good point.
All right, where does the Anglo Church start if they're saying, hey, I've seen these other cultures around me, and I get it. We're not going to give a comprehensive answer to this right now, but just some things for them to think about.
Settle in for the next 2 hours.
Yes.
Here we go. Here's the plan.
Hope you're comfy.
Yeah. I think it starts with asking, really, if you're starting that way, what the scenario is here is that you're bringing outsiders in. So you're reaching the lost. You're doing evangelism and outreach. And so to me, as a missionary and one who, has thought about outreach and evangelism for years now and has church planted in a different culture, the first question is, what do they need?
Yeah. Okay.
What do they need? How can I serve them? I think door knocking is a great tool, can be valuable for a lot of people. But for me, my big investment is how can we serve?
Yeah.
And how can I connect with them? How can I establish a friendship with them, a rapport with them, so that I can then turn around and open the gospel and teach them about Jesus?
Sure.
So one of the biggest opportunities we have here, and I think I talked about this last time, is we're serving here in the States and immigrant communities.
Yeah.
There is an endless list of needs that they have. They're strangers, they're foreigners. And the Bible speaks a lot about the foreigner too, and how we can serve the foreigner. And so when you consider that, it's a lot clearer on how to serve and reach out to the foreigner than it is to our own neighbor who's been here for forever and his family grew up here. One of the specific ways that we've done is English, using English, teaching English, using the Bible. That is the greatest need. In immigrant communities here in the States, I haven't seen poverty as much as maybe you would in the third world. They came here to work. And so most of them have jobs, they have an income, but they lack English to be able to open the doors for the future. And so you offer English and it's legit. It's not a bait and switch. It's legit service to teach them. You can then teach them the gospel too. And so to me, that would be the first step for a church that wants to help out. It wants to reach out to how their community has changed, and they have good hearts and sincerity to do that. Ask the question, what do they need? And how can we serve? And just get those people who are creative, who are brainstormers in a meeting together. And I think a local church can come up with a lot of ways that they can serve the immigrant communities.
It would seem like then the next steps would just sort of illuminate themselves from there.
Yes,
right? I mean, once you're getting connected with people, you're learning their needs. Okay, here we
There's
go.
some major pieces to it, like who's gonna teach and preach?
Right,
workers. We lack that, and that's
Mhm.
one area I'm hoping to develop in the future is
Yeah.
more workers here who speak in both languages.
Good.
So, yeah, there's other things like that need to be
Or
considered.
are there people who, know a little Spanish? Maybe they can converse if they're a tourist in some country. Maybe they need to go a little deeper with their skills and that kind of thing. Okay,
Yes,
good. Accommodating.
Accommodating is the key word.
That's what we've learned today on Preachers in
Yes.
Training. We're accommodating. Barton, thank you. Appreciate this and excited about what's ahead for you. And thanks for just sharing some time and expertise with us. It means a lot.
This was great. Last time we were in a great studio in a church building. This time I like this energy. This is great. But I always enjoy talking to you. Thanks.
Nobody's
for
paying
me.
attention to us, but they're around.
Yeah, that's right.
It's just good to see other faces.
Yep. I really enjoyed this though. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you for being a part of this. And thank all of you. If you're listening or watching, we're grateful that you're a part of Preachers in Training. Thanks to our listener who requested this topic. This was a good one. One I think that we need to be thinking about more as we're positioning ourselves to reach our communities for Jesus. Preachers at thelightnetwork.tv is how you can submit your episode idea. We're always taking those. We'd love to hear them. This season is pretty well booked. I mean, you guys have filled in our schedule for the future, but we're always planning, Lord willing, for what's coming up next. And so we'd love to hear from you. thelightnetwork.tv is that website where you can find previous episodes, subscription links, blah, blah, blah. All that stuff is there. Go to your favorite podcast app, search Preachers in Training, and hit the follow us or subscribe button so you never miss an episode. It's going to do it this week. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you next time. Let's go preach the word.